But the J.P. Morgan Company was not one of the major financial families of the world, even though he was advertised and publicized for many years as the world's leading banker, the world's leading capitalist. I found in my researches over the years that there are, in the world order, a three-tier hierarchical system of families. The first families are the Rothschilds, the Schiffs, the Warburgs, and the old black nobility. And the second tier are their underlings, people like Averell Harriman, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller. Yes, the Rockefellers are not first tier, they're second tier. And then on the third tier, you had the families who served the second families, and that included the Bush family, because the Bush family was involved in Brown Brothers Harriman, which was the Harriman family banking house. And George Bush was named after his grandfather, George Herbert Walker, who was president of W.A. Harriman Company in 1929, and which became later Brown Brothers Harriman. Now, a friend said to me recently, he said, well, you go all around the country publicizing George Bush. Why doesn't George Bush give you a retainer? Because I do. I tell people as I go travel around, I tell them the real family history of George Bush. One of the things which George Herbert Walker did, well, he did endow the Walker Cup, which is the most prestigious award in golf. But he also was a director of a firm called American International Corporation, which was set up in 1915 in New York to take over a burden which Jacob Schiff of Kuhn Loeb Company, the Rothschild firm in New York, had maintained for many years. Jacob Schiff had spent $20 million of his personal fortune to promote Bolshevik propaganda in Russia and to overthrow the Tsar of Russia. So by 1915, Jacob Schiff was tired of spending all of his money. He didn't spend it all, but he had spent $20 million. So he suggested to his fellow financiers that they help him in order to subsidize the effort to change the government of Russia and replace it with a communist government. So they agreed, and he had people like Percy Rockefeller, George Herbert Walker, and others to join him in setting up American International Corporation, which then began to promote the communists in Russia in a big way. And within 2 years, they succeeded and they took over the government of Russia. Now, the reason they took over the government of Russia was not that these bankers wanted to overthrow international finance. The Rothschilds wanted the Tsar's fortune, which was the largest private fortune in the world at that time. And, of course, they achieved their immediate goal. They were never really interested in communism. They were interested in money and power, which they still are. And when I speak of the three tiers of families, Lenin referred to the second tier families and the third tier families as useful idiots. And that term, I think, still bears up today, because the first tier of families were the people who exercised the real power and the real influence, and the second and the third tier families, such as the Bush family, were considered by the first tier as useful idiots who would do their bidding throughout their lives, because by obeying their dictates, they themselves would be very handsomely rewarded. They would have fortune, they would have financial independence, and they would have a certain degree of political power. So as I say, George Bush was of the third tier family, and he is related distantly to the Queen of England and the black nobility, but he was chosen as head of the Central Intelligence Agency, which is the world's leading drug organization. He was chosen to head that agency simply because of his relationship to the Queen of England. Lyndon LaRouche received a great deal of ridicule because in his public statements he identified the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, as the world's chief drug dealer. Well, of course, I doubt if Queen Elizabeth has ever handled any drugs in her life, but what he was referring to was her symbolic position as the head of the British Royal House. And the British Royal House made their initial money in dealing in slaves. And then by the dawn of the 19th century, there was a great deal of resentment around the world about the institution of slavery. So they more or less abandoned the slave trade and went into the drug trade. And they found out that was a lot more profitable, because when you brought a shipload of slaves from Africa for sale, by the time you delivered them to the docks, half of them would be dead because the conditions were pretty horrible. So, but when you ship drugs, opium, you really don't have any losses. If you pack them well, you're not, and you don't have any seawater damage, you're not going to lose any of your cargo. So the British royal family and the black nobility made a lot more money out of the drug trade, and of course they've been promoting drugs ever since. And the reason that Bush became head of the CIA was that because the drug trade was run from London and Hong Kong through the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, the Central Intelligence Agency, as I point out in my book, The World Order, was set up during the Second World War as the Office of Strategic Services. It was set up as an intelligence agency, which was simply a branch of the British Secret Intelligence Service. Now, the British Secret Intelligence Service had been set up by the Bank of England after it was chartered in 1694. It was the oldest and the most effective secret service in the world, and it remains that today. So when Bush was named head of the CIA, he was simply receiving an honor which was due him due to the fact that he was a member of this family. And of course, as head of the CIA, he was the symbolic drug leader of the world. So when he became president, then he had to launch a crusade against drugs. Well, unfortunately, the crusade against drugs has turned into a crusade against the civil liberties of every American citizen, because now they have all this stop and search, and they have the tax restrictions and the restrictions on handling any sum over $10,000, and they want to get rid of the $100 bills. All of these are designed to increase the amount of government intervention in your private life. And of course, this is done by the politicians because they themselves are the useful idiots in Washington who simply carry out the orders of their superiors. No one could be elected to political office in the United States who was truly an independent thinker or an independent actor. Well, when I say actor, you probably think of Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan got the best role of his life. After being in Hollywood for many years, he was finally given the best character portrayal he could ever do, and that was to be President of the United States. And he had enjoyed it immensely, and he never fluffed a line during his entire political career in Washington. And he really did a great job. And of course, George Bush does not have those attributes. He doesn't have the show business background, but he does have what is even better. He has the family relationship with the black nobility. So he too can do no wrong in the eyes of the world order. And the drug trade, as you notice, gets bigger every day, and the government appropriates more and more money to control it. And the only result is that your taxes go up and your civil liberties are increased.